everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. In this episode, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to gold medal winning Paralympic javelin thrower Dan Pembroke. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Dan, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Evie. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's a real pleasure to get to talk to you, and I'm super excited to hear all about your incredible career and sort of life outside of that as well. But before we get into any of that, what have you been up to today?
Well, today, we're gearing up for Christmas as we're doing this podcast now, and it's been quite a busy day in town, clothes shopping and gift buying and all these different things, but also training and just been jam-packed for the normal stuff. But I guess training plays a part in that also.
Wow, it sounds like you've had a pretty busy day. I mean, for purpose of listeners, because I think this will go out after Christmas. Yeah, we're doing this at the start of December, so it's very much Christmas. But it's pretty full on. I mean, have you got all presents sorted out yet, or is that still work in progress?
Work in progress.
Work in progress.
Hopefully, when the listeners are listening to this, I've done everything right.
Oh God, yeah. I feel like that, and I feel like present buying is like simultaneously the nicest thing, like watching everyone open their presents and seeing their reactions, but also working out what to get everyone and working out what they're like and what they need and what they want. Like it's like a balancing act, isn't it? You know, you've got so many people to buy for.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really go into too much of buying lots of different things. For us, really at Christmas, it's about being together because I live in Hereford and most of my family live away from that area, and so Christmas is a really nice time for family all really to come together. So we spend a lot of money mainly on the food that we're about to eat, and have a really good time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's one of the most special parts of Christmas. Like obviously there's the gift giving side of it, but I think the reason why I love Christmas so much is actually, like you say, being together as a family, which is something that, many families might not be able to do the rest of the year. I think that sort of togetherness is what I really love about Christmas.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would back that one for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a very special time of year. Now, sort of moving on from Christmas, I know that, like myself, you are visually impaired. So can you tell me a little bit about your eye condition?
Yeah, sure. So I have retinitis pigmentosa. It's a condition which affects my peripheral vision and also gives me something called night blindness. It's kind of a vague term, I guess, night blindness, but it basically means that in low light levels, my light receptors in my eyes are very few and far in between, so they don't pick out as much light as normal eyes do in dark environments. So, for example, when I'm in like a candlelit restaurant or something like that, I basically see nothing. And with that restricted view, so with the central vision that I have, it's about sort of a 10-degree radius. So yeah, very, very tunnel visioned. Yeah, and I got diagnosed when I was the age of 6, and my parents told me that I had the condition at the age of 8, and told me, yeah, that I would eventually go fully blind with this condition. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's my condition, RP.
Wow, okay. So obviously the thing that springs to my mind there is obviously being diagnosed at 6 and being told about it at 8 years old. At that point you're still a very young child. And do
Mm.
you think you were sort of fully able to comprehend the impact of that at that age? Can you remember how much of that you understood?
Um, I don't think at that time I really kind of understood the gravity of what my parents were telling me. But ultimately, I think it was a really good move on their part, because what it enabled me to do is kind of, because I wasn't fully aware of what it meant, it sort of leaked into my psyche very slowly. You know what I mean? And I sort of grew up with that understanding that I may lose my eyesight totally later on in life. And so, but what it did instill in me was this sense of, I want to say the word urgency, but it's more acted like a catalyst to do the things that I really wanted to do with my usable eyesight at the time throughout my life. And so that spurred me on to do many different things, and not only become a Paralympian, but travel the world, and you know, uh, yeah, take advantage of things whilst they're happening.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it kind of gave you that motivation to kind of, take the opportunities that you had and do the things you wanted to do. But obviously, you mentioned there about that kind of awareness that you were going to lose your sight, kind of you being able to slowly comprehend that. Are you glad that you kind of had that preparation rather than it being, you were told at a slightly older age and it was kind of like something you realized very quickly?
Yeah, I think when you get a diagnosis of a degenerative eye condition later on in life, in your later teens and things like that, it can be very, very daunting, because you've grown up throughout your teen years, sort of not realizing you've got a degenerative eye condition, and then when you're told that you eventually go blind, it's like a big bombshell on your life, and it can be probably quite hard to get over. But what I would say is, anyone that has been diagnosed with a condition like that later on in life, is that you need to keep kind of pushing on, and not shying away from things that make you feel uncomfortable, maybe social events, all these different types of things, because you will adapt. And the quicker that you adapt, the better your life's going to be, I guess, because with the degenerative eye condition, it's getting worse and worse. And so if you kind of like sit away from life and let life happen without you in it, it gets harder and harder to adapt eventually when you do decide to make that step out. So yeah, it's about sort of rolling with the punches as you go with degenerative eye conditions.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. And I mean, I would imagine that sort of having an eye condition that gradually deteriorates is quite challenging. So, I was wondering, how have you managed that challenge over the years?
Um, I think it's been a mindset. I haven't always been very confident. Maybe in my early teens, I used to get bullied quite a bit, and you know, but ultimately, I guess it's sort of, I had this revelation. I was reading a book, actually. It's called The Secret by Rhonda Bryan, and it's about law of attraction. So if you want things in your life that are positive, and how to get these things, it's about following that positive energy. And ultimately, that's what I ended up doing, and that's what led me to travel the world for 4 years, and become a power athlete at the end of that as well. Just following those small little sparks of positive inspiration. And that you can apply that from every aspect of your life, and it's helped me no end.
Wow, yeah. I mean, yeah, that sounds like a really great mindset to have, I think. I think it's very easy for us to kind of look at the negatives in our lives, because often they feel bigger than the positives, the small wins. I think we
Mm.
tend to think about our losses. We tend to count our losses much quicker than we count those little positive moments that kind of pass us by without us thinking about them. And I think it's really important to kind of try and make yourself aware of those little positives, even if they are tiny, because I think it will really improve your mindset.
Yeah, I think, negative and positive thoughts work in the same way in terms of they're a spiral. So, you start thinking about, say, a negative point in your life, and it might be something very, very small, right? And then you dwell on that, and then all of a sudden, other things are affected by the negativity that you're being drawn to on that very small thing, and they can affect other things. And all of a sudden, you've got other negative things pulling you down, spiraling down. But it's exactly the same as, say, a positive experience in your life. But we're less fond of sort of really embracing the positive thing. I think the pessimistic part of the brain kind of goes, oh, well, um, yeah, that's happened, but, let's not dwell on it. We don't really take the point and, spiral upwards. But it can do in exactly the same way. So if something positive happens, a very small thing in your day, if you're like, oh, that was great. Even like making your bed in the morning, it's a very overused term, but it is. It's the first accomplishment of the day is making your bed. Um, and yeah, if you think about these things more and more with a positive mindset, you can spiral your life upwards and create more and more positive actions in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I completely agree with you there. I do wonder sometimes, why the brain kind of dwells on the negative things, because I think it's something we're all a little bit guilty of, even if we don't really admit it. I think our brains always do tend to naturally flip to the negatives. And I do really wonder why that is. I think it's a tendency that we all have.
Mm, yeah, it is, but ultimately we can try to be in control of that, and but there's always a balance in life, and we can't always be thinking positively at 100% of our lives, but realizing that it is a spiral, and if you're in a really big downward spiral and thinking about things very intently negatively, then you can do things to actually build that back up again.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a little bit earlier that one of the things you did, one of the things that you were kind of spurred on to do as you were losing your sight was travel the world, and you traveled the world for 4 years. So,
Mm.
I'm very interested in that. So, can you tell me about some of the experiences that you had whilst you were doing that?
Yeah, so ultimately the reasons why is because I was an able-bodied athlete all the way up until 2012. And 2012, I was gunning for the 2012 Olympic Games, and everything was going well. And then I snapped a ligament in my elbow in a competition just before the Olympic Games, and that stopped me from getting to London. And then I realized that I would need surgery on that elbow, and possibly my elbow might not be the same, ever again. So I had the surgery done, and then they said, well, it could be 3 years before you actually throw javelin properly again. And I remember when my parents told me at the age of 8 that I had retinitis pigmentosa, the doctors at the time said that Dan might go blind in his mid-20s. And at this time, I was 20 years of age. The surgeons just told me that it may be 3 years until I can throw again. It brings me up to 23 years of age. I might only have 2 years left of my usable vision. So that was kind of the big dilemma in my life. And again, this is the catalyst that made me want. I always wanted to go and see the world. And so ultimately, that's what I did. And I told my coach, who was my dad, Kevin Pembroke at the time, just said, look, I want to go and see the world. I haven't got 3 years to wait around. So this is what I'm going to do. And yeah, I went off traveling and experienced some amazing things around the world. You know, some really scary moments and some incredibly beautiful and moments that will stay with me until I'm grey and old.
I mean, that sounds absolutely amazing. I mean, when you started traveling, did you have a sort of checklist of all the places you wanted to visit, or did you think of more whilst you were traveling? How did it all work?
Um, Really, it was just like through my teen years, my life was quite regimented because I was going to school, I had homework to do, and I was training 6 days a week. You know, so it's quite a regimental lifestyle. And so for me, it was just so nice to not have that, you know, constantly the scheduled day in, day out kind of life. And so I just basically wanted to get away from all of that. And yeah, I didn't really have any itinerary. I mean, the first country that I went to, I literally opened the map of Europe, closed my eyes, and pushed my finger down to the page, and it landed in the Mediterranean Sea, and the nearest landmass was Sardinia, just off the coast of Italy. So that's where I booked my plane ticket, and I packed a bag full of a spear gun, a fishing rod, and camping essentials. And I went out there for 2 weeks. Absolutely loved the place. I was kayaking on a sea kayak out in this beautiful coves of Sardinia, and coming back and sleeping on the beaches and cooking my food on by the campfire. And it was, you know, all on my own, just reflecting on all the bad things that had just gone on, but also reading this book, The Secret, which ultimately changed the way that I perceived the world, and the way that I wanted to have an outlook on my experiences.
Wow, I mean, that sounds incredible. And based on what you're saying, I imagine that time in your life was quite a sort of pivotal 4 years for you. Um, I want to delve into though, that time sort of that spurred you on to go traveling, that time where it was going to be a few years before you were able to throw again, but you were also losing your sight and all that. I would imagine that must have been pretty, pretty tough emotionally. So, during that time, what were you feeling?
Um, I was probably feeling lots of different emotions, you know, almost anger, sadness, um, confusion about, you know, because I thought that I was going to be an international athlete and competing for my country, but all of a sudden this thing's just been put in my way, and ultimately I was left with a big decision. But you know, that decision was made very quickly, and that's because of my diagnosis of RP and being told that you know, I don't have long of my usable vision. And yeah, you know what, I guess I'm quite spontaneous, and I just decided on something and we just went 100% into it. Yeah, and then ultimately I then actually moved to Sardinia and lived there for a summer, and that's where I met my now wife, Martina. And we actually met, and one of our greatest passions was to be able to go and see the world. And so yeah, we both shared this dream, and we ended up going to New Zealand, Australia, and a lot of Southeast Asia.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, that's amazing that you guys were able to meet there, and amazing that, if you hadn't hadn't decided that was the first place you wanted to go, or maybe not even decided, just sort of randomly chose by putting your finger
Yeah.
on that map, um, that you may not have met. And I mean,
Mm.
it's so mad to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, the synchronicity of it all was quite incredible, and everything sort of seemed to just fall into line very, very easily. Um, yeah, it was it was a great time, and still is a great time. Is uh, seeing more and more of what life is bringing, especially now with athletics involved as well. It's constantly changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so interesting as well that what you just said there about, athletics and it being sort of a constantly changing thing. I mean, I'm going to be real with you. I do not know the first thing about athletics. I've never had any experience with it. In school, it's something I've never been able to do, and I don't know the first thing about it. But,
Yeah.
you're a gold medal winning, Paralympic javelin thrower. When did you kind of realize, okay, javelin is the sport that I want to have a career in?
Um, mine was in school. So it's first year of secondary school. Um, there was a lesson on athletics. So, one lesson it was all running. The second lesson it was all jumps, and then third lesson it was all throws. And yeah, I picked up the javelin, and I think I was the third best in my class. And the teacher talked to the first two that were better than me and said about an athletics club, and I was sort of like eavesdropping in the background and took note of this athletics club. And ultimately, though, the two that were better than me didn't go to the club, and I did. And then within the next 2 months, I broke the school record, and yeah, I was well on my way to enjoying athletics. But I was never any good at any other sports, to be honest. I really found it very early on, which is handy.
Yes, I mean, it definitely is considering everything you've accomplished now. Um, was it kind of like, I don't want to use the term love at first sight, but love at first sight thing? Like, did you kind of know once you started that athletics club and once you sort of were getting good at javelin that was what you want to do, what you wanted to do as a career, or did that take a bit of deciding?
Yeah, it took a bit of deciding, but I was very excited because it was something that, in sport, I mean, I was never really into any football. I never used to support any football teams or anything like that, or rugby. I was very much into my fishing and outdoors sort of stuff. And so I'd never really been into sport. And then when this happened, I was like, oh, it's not bad. I can throw a stick a long way. But I never really understood where it could take me until I was kind of leading up towards London um, Olympic Games. Um, but yeah, and then it became my goal from about the age of, say, 14, 15. I was thinking, right, I can do this as an international athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've proved to everyone that you can. I'm gathering from everything you said about your love for traveling and fishing and all that fun stuff. You're a very outdoorsy person, is what I'm gathering. What do you like about being sort of outdoors and in nature and that kind of thing?
Um, to be honest, I need a big dose of nature now, really, because my life's been so crazy recently, with more media appearances and all these different things. And ultimately, nature kind of grounds me as a person, as a human being. Like I have an allotment, which I grow a lot of my own fruit and veg and all these different things. And I love that, just being there and just get my hands dirty in the soil. And every worry that I've got, it kind of just melts away. So yeah, I think that's it really. Nature is a very uh, yeah, sort of primeval kind of luxury that we have, and we can indulge in it, and it really helps the soul, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really lovely thing to be able to do, having that allotment and being able to kind of do that when things are getting a bit too much. I think that's a great thing to have in your life.
Yeah, I think like I walk to training, so it takes me about an hour to walk where I go. And then on the way back, especially in the summertime, I come back past the allotment, go into the allotment, and I will tend to the crops that I'm growing, and also I'll have lunch straight from the allotment in my shed, and I've got like a stove and stuff like that, and I'll cook my post exercise meal in there. So it's always a really nice place where I can come back and reflect on where my career is going, but also just to shut everything else out as well. Gives you that space and headspace to kind of, yes, shuffle things around a bit and what's important.
My God, you've got a whole like setup. I love that. Um, I imagine as well, like I'll say it again, I don't know much about athletics, but training for anything, to do with sport, it's quite a sort of tough, hardcore thing. So I'd imagine it's quite a nice way to wind down from that. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. Yeah, especially like a Paralympic Games, when you're out there, it's really crazy what it does to you physically, but also mentally. Because when I was out there in Paris, I have a wristwatch which measures all different vitals in your body, including how many calories that you burn. Now, on the day of my competition, I'm really doing nothing. On the lead up to it, I'm just relaxing, chilling out, trying not to think about the competition too much. Now, when the competition's going on, it's all guns blazing, and I'm only out there for about an hour and a half about an hour and a half. But the adrenaline that's pumping through your veins when you're there and there's 65,000 people in the stadium is immense. And at the end of the day, I looked at my watch and how many calories that I'd burnt. And it was 5,500 calories, which is the most I've ever burnt in one day by 1,000 calories, which is phenomenal when you think about it. So you can imagine what something like that does to your sort of mental attitude and physical attitude. You really need to be able to chill out after that point and absorb what's just happened. And yeah, being in nature, being at the allotment is kind of what I really desired after coming back from Paris.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, do you think obviously sport is kind of all about the physical aspect, but do you think it's ever sort of underappreciated how much it takes a toll mentally as well?
Yeah, I think we're just starting to delve into that as an association in British athletics. About the wind down after Paralympics. It plays a big toll in it because you've got to process all those emotions that your body has had a massive assault on. Because your life changes around those sort of like 4 months around, like before the Paralympics and after, where everything's just very heightened, media coverage, processing, your performance in those games, and also processing inactivity after the games, because ultimately we do have a rest, but that rest is also strange because throughout the whole year, we're not really having a break at all. So kind of resetting all your life and your regime is very different. Difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, that's something I've never actually thought about before, the kind of aftermath, but it makes
Mm.
complete sense now you say it. And I mean, I'm I can't imagine how weird that must feel. Like, how long do you think it took you to, or have you, got back to your kind of routine that you had pre Paralympic mayhem?
Um, no, I guess I'll be totally honest with you. Recently, I've been struggling quite a bit with like bouts of anxiety and things like this because ultimately things have just been so busy, more so on the media front, and sort of like having to make all these bigger decisions for the future, going on, and also now getting back into training. It's been quite a lot to deal with. So yeah, mentally, I'm still sort of figuring that one out. And it was after Tokyo as well, like 3 years ago. I went through a stage of just being quite emotionally numb, just because it was an amazing experience, and it's such a big experience that yeah, it can kind of leave you with almost like decision fatigue and emotional fatigue, which then just has a little bit of a toll. But I'm still learning how to negate that, and that's truly and honestly.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, kind of thank you for opening up about that, because I think that in itself is a big thing to talk about, that actually, like, you are still sort of struggling a little bit. And I also think it makes complete sense. You've had such a massive experience in your life, and it's like, I guess you don't really know. I could be wrong here, but, like, I guess you don't really know sort of how to feel. I feel like sometimes when you have too many emotions going on at once, it then in a weird way causes you to just feel like very strange and numb at the same time. It's almost like you're kind of like overflowing with emotions. And then I imagine you being so busy on top of that is then just adding to it as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think ultimately you just need that time every now and then to know when your brain's kind of overloaded. But sometimes it's hard to sit back and stop, because you've already got commitments going on, and life does move on. But it's using those sort of coping mechanisms, and to be able to deal with that at the time. But soon I will get that time to really kind of relax, and it will be over Christmas, I should expect. But in the meantime, learning to be able to like meditate, and also I'm using I use Wim Hof technique. So it's about these breathing exercises mixed with cold water submersion, which I find really, really helps. Just about sort of clearing the mind and sort of refreshing your body. It's almost a bit like a reset.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, that sounds great. I think what you said there
Oh,
about
it doesn't
coping.
it doesn't feel great though, Evie. Getting in
Well,
cold
yeah.
water is horrible.
Well, yeah, I would imagine that. But but the effects of it sound great. We'll go with that. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah. But I think what you said there about sort of coping mechanisms is very important, and about finding things that work for you. And I also think that can be tricky as well. Like, there are so many great coping mechanisms out there, but no one coping mechanism is going to work for everyone, because, like, that
no,
would be impossible. So it's about finding what works for you. And I think also recognizing when you need to use them, and when it's time to take a step back, and when it's time to unwind, and kind of the learning what's too much for you and when you kind of need to unwind.
yeah, no, definitely that. And I think it also helps when you talk to people about it, because ultimately when you talk it, you're kind of getting that off your chest. You know what I mean? Even if they're not going to suggest anything, it's nice to be able to offload that sometimes, and that can ultimately help you kind of figure out what you kind of need. So yeah, talk
Yeah,
to
yeah.
someone.
Absolutely. Yeah, talking is a really important thing, and I think something that we're only starting to appreciate now, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it does wonders for, that social aspect of talking about a problem, then it's two heads rather than one thinking about it, or if it's just offloading your mind. So yeah, I think it's very important.
Yeah, definitely. So, going back to kind of Paralympics then, obviously you were almost able to qualify for the 2012 Olympics, and obviously weren't able to. When you kind of found out you were able to qualify for the Paralympics, was that kind of a bit of a sort of glimmer of hope for you?
Um, well, at first, so I came back from traveling. I was living in Tasmania at the time, and my eyesight was starting to impede the jobs that I was doing. And so, yeah, ultimately, we made that decision to move back to the UK, because there was a SES program, which is a adult learning course for the Hereford Royal National College for the Blind in Hereford. And so I went there and I got offered this space to do sports massage therapy. And so moved back to the UK and I was in the course for about 3 months. And I was getting a little bit a little bit bored of being so unactive. And I thought to myself, you know what, I wonder if I can throw javelin again. And then that's when somebody said to me, why don't you try out for para sport? And again, it's using those small little words, or those little moments of inspiration with a positive attitude, that made me make that decision to actually talk to someone at British Athletics. And they sent me away from my national classification to get my eyes classified to see whether or not I fitted into a category in the Paralympics. And I went up to Manchester, had my eyes tested, and I was thinking, there's no way that I'm going to get into the Paralympics. Anyway, they came along to me and said, right, there are 3 categories in the Paralympics. There is the F and T 11, F and T 12, F and T 13. And those categories correspond with the lowest number being full blindness, and then the middle category being severely sight impaired, which I believe is like 5% or less of your vision, and then F13 being 10% or less of your vision. And they categorized me as an F13 athlete. And they said I was borderline F12. So actually going in towards that 5% vision. So that really took me back a little bit, because I didn't realize how bad my eyesight was, because I've been coping with the slow deterioration year after year. And so that was like a realization of, wow, I didn't realize how bad it got. And then they turn around and say, well, you're classified as an F13 athlete. Start training, because we want to see you in the Paralympic Games. And that's what I did. I trained for just over a year and a half, and I went to my first Paralympic Games. And with that, I came home with a Paralympic record of 69.52, which was the start of something big.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like everything happened pretty quickly there. Like, you had the realization that your sight was maybe even worse than you thought. Then you actually were like, okay, well, I qualify for the Paralympics. And then you were like, right, I've got to start training. It sounds like, things happened, that was pretty full on.
Yeah, it was a massive culture shock, because you can imagine I was traveling and I was, living on a backpack, inside a backpack, and eating pies and drinking things that athletes don't drink, and it was all a different lifestyle. And then all of a sudden I've been thrust into this, right, okay, elite performance. And it took a while for me to get used to that again. But yeah, it was great to be back in that scene again after 9 years away from athletics. And that's when I said goodbye to athletics in 2013, to then saying hello to it again, in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it must have been amazing. So, talking of sort of training then, can you tell me about the way in which you train and how you kind of accommodate your visual impairment to be able to compete?
Yeah, sure. So with my eyesight, my central vision is very good. So I can see things with very good clarity in front of me, but just nothing throughout the sides. So when I'm actually throwing the javelin, as a javelin thrower, we often look where we're going to throw, and so that we call that your sight line. So that stays constant throughout the time in which I'm throwing. But when I'm looking at my sight line of where I'm going to throw, I can't see anything around it. So I can't see the floor, where I'm stepping, where the line is. So I have to adapt the way that I train. And that comes in, like, when we're preparing for the run up, I actually count my steps. So mine is 9 steps and 7. So 9 steps forwards and 7 crossovers. And then I throw. And so we gauge all of that distance We set a mark up and a run up, and ultimately that works. So every time that you see me competing on the television, I will be counting in my head the exact steps that I'm doing, and yeah, that keeps me behind the sector line, because if you go over that, then it's a no throw. And also there's lots of drills to improve my proprioception, so my ability to know where I am in space. But it sounds a strange one, but knowing where the floor is, because when I run, I'm always almost like searching for the ground, which makes me quite toey, pushing my toes down before they should do, and stopping me from heel striking. So there's a few adaptations there that are necessary for me to be able to throw javelin the way I do.
Wow, okay. I mean, that sounds really cool. And I guess it's just about sort of not only adapting, but working out what kind of adaptations work for you as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there would have been so many more adaptations happening subconsciously throughout my years living on the earth. So as my eyesight deteriorated, there's many things that I do. For example, when I go into a room, my eyes scan the room very, very quickly to know if there are any dangers that I need to know of, and my brain subconsciously memorizes where those things are without having to look. And my brain gives me a perception of my environment around me, even though I can't see in those areas. It gives me a general color of the background and objects that I've seen in my scanned vision previous, and it stays there.
Wow, okay. I mean, that's incredible because that's probably a more, like you say, subconscious thing that you don't really think about and just do without realizing now, but it is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's the mind doing all these things, and that's why it's so important to always, go out of your comfort zone with a degenerative eye condition, because all these micro adjustments that your body's making are happening subconsciously. So it makes your life easier the more times you expose yourself to uncomfortable situations. And, those adaptations don't have to be so big, if you do them very seldomly, if you're getting out of your comfort zone very, very seldomly, and your body just doesn't react as it should do.
Yeah, 100%. So you, like you've mentioned, you have competed in both the Tokyo and Paris Paralympic Games. And you've achieved some really incredible things. I believe Paris, you broke the world record twice. I think that's right. And you've achieved some really incredible things. We've talked about the kind of aftermath of the games, but can you tell me a bit about, the experiences of the games themselves?
Yeah, I mean, my lead up to Paris was a bit of a bumpy one, filled with injuries, a change of coach, um, and change of philosophy in the way that I train, and my preparation for the games. So I'm now coached by John Trower, who is Steve Backley's former coach. Who Steve Backley was our best ever male athlete, male javelin thrower. And ultimately, he comes with a lot of knowledge, to lead me into these games. And yeah, the experience was incredible. I've done a lot of visualization leading up to the games to make my body understand what to expect, because in Tokyo we didn't have any crowds. So adapting the body to overcome having 65,000 people in the stadium is quite important, to not spook yourself when you go out there. And I'd done that in the lead up to it, and went out there, and the experience was incredible, because I was able to be out there knowing how it would make me feel by visualizing prior to the performance. And that night was a golden night. It was incredible. I had my first world record in the third throw, which was 71.15 meters, and then in the same round there was the Iranian Ali Perouge, and he got a 3 meter personal best, which his javelin just landed just behind mine, and I thought, wow, the job's not done yet. So I on the fourth round, I came down and threw 74 meters and 49 centimeters, which absolutely obliterated the world record, my previous world record, and that got the job done.
Oh my gosh. I genuinely, like, I don't know what to say to that apart from that must have been like the best feeling in the world for you.
Yeah, I mean, it totally shook me to my core, really, because I wasn't expecting that. You know, the lead up to Paris wasn't, like I said, not very good. I tore my hamstring on January the 1st that year. Sorry, I clear my voice. And yeah, and then I suffered a calf tear just before the World Championships that year. And so, you know, I had to really adapt my training, and I wasn't in the best physical condition that I could have been in. So, yeah, to come out and throw 74.5 meters was truly beyond my wildest dreams.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned earlier there about the addition of having the crowds there at Paris that you didn't have at Tokyo. Do you think the crowds helped you and kind of added to the atmosphere, or did it spook you a little bit?
No, I think it would have done, I think, if I hadn't done the visualization, because in visualizations, you know, you spend like 10 minutes almost meditating and getting like singular thoughts. And then you start your preparation. And the way that we prep for these competitions is that you visualize being at the competition. So I looked at pictures of the stadium, pictures of where I would be throwing. And so I would imagine in my mind me walking through the gates of those the stadium doors and seeing the crowds full, you know, and sort of realizing what that would make me feel like. Once I was out there, I would imagine my competitors around me and all their little habits of what they normally do in competition. I would sort of envision them doing all these things. So it would really get me into the scene of what I was about to undertake. And that really helped me, because when I got out there, I was expecting all these things. And so that made me appreciate the whole situation a lot more and be a lot more comfortable whilst I was out there. So yeah, and then when the crowd started getting behind me, you know, all nationalities in the stadium, it was a hell of a feeling. It was just immense. And yeah, ultimately it got the best out of me.
Wow, I mean, yeah, I mean that's so interesting, and I can imagine that the visualization really helped. But yeah, I bet that must have been such an amazing experience. Now obviously being a visually impaired athlete, have you ever faced any, misconceptions?
Yeah, I mean, after after winning gold and the world records, you know, it blew up on social media and things like this, and a lot of the people saw my event and was like, "Why is this guy frauding the Paralympic system?" You know, and there were people going, "What do you mean?" It's like, well, he's not blind. You know what I mean? He doesn't look visually impaired, and so it was yeah, it was kind of a strange thing to having to sort of like justify my place in para sport. Um, and yeah, that was a very strange thing to have, because yeah, you look at me, and because I have very good central vision, um, people just don't realize how impaired I am, and the adaptations that I've had to use in my life to be able to do all those things that people see me do with ease. But I'm working on a lot of things now to try and replicate my vision on screen and actually really show to people what it means to be visually impaired, because it's a very, very invisible disability. Um, yeah, to take away that misconception, and especially, you know, I'll be using a cane soon. I should think I should be using one now, but you know, when I've heard people with stories of like they're walking down the street with their cane and then they get their phone out, and because somebody sees them using their phone and they've got a white cane, they get called out as being a fraud and, put on social media and things like this and being called out. And that's just not on. So I would like to try and change that perception that the public has of visually impaired people via feature films that we're trying to get commissioned at the moment.
I think that's such a brilliant thing to want to do, and I think it's so needed, and I'm super excited to see what you do with that because I think it's something that we really need. I think the perception of visual impairment in the public eye can sometimes be quite narrow in the respect that I think when people think blind, they think one very particular thing and think that all visually impaired people should fit into that thing, that particular image, and I think it's like that for a lot of disabilities too. And I think visual impairment is one of the main ones, and I think it is really needed to change that public perception. Like, you said earlier about not looking blind. Like, that's such a weird thing in itself. Like, I don't it genuinely baffles me how that's a thing that like, I've had a few guests mention that phrase to me, and it who are visually impaired themselves, and it's like, it's such a mad thing to say to someone, and the fact that, like you said, people having to justify their place in parasport or outside of that in other things as well. It's mad because able-bodied people might not and probably don't have to do that.
No, they don't. But it's a question out there, and the reason why we get so much of this feedback back and this sort of ignorance is because there's lack of information, or lack of empathy. So it's got to be someone's job to be able to educate these people, and I think I haven't got an incredible massive following, but with the small little platform that I've got, maybe I can just do my part to educate a certain amount of people, which might go a long way. Let's see where it goes, but yeah, I think just making people more aware of it is a good thing, and explaining the difficulties that we do have and what we can do. You know what I mean? Like ultimately, it's an impairment is there to overcome as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I really I completely agree with you on that. Now, I believe that you have a tattoo of an eye. So, can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so it was designed by myself and Zach Morris, who's a local tattoo artist in Hereford, and he got my contact details after I came back from Tokyo, and he said, "Look, if you want your Paralympic tattoo done, I'll do it for free." And so I took him up on his offer, and we came up with this design, and it's on my throwing arm on the inside of my bicep, and it's basically it's a picture of my eye superimposed, so all you see is my eye with eyelashes top and bottom, and then we have my iris, and now inside the iris is the Agitos, which is the Paralympic symbol. And then below my bottom eyelid, it says RP made me fly. And so that's basically referring to, all those things I was saying previously about the decisions were made easier because I had retinitis pigmentosa. The decision to go off traveling and not procrastinate and worry about where my next move was. It made me pursue the positive thing in my life that I was going for at that time. And ultimately it made me travel. It made me meet my now wife. And it's given me the Paralympic Games and given me this platform I'm on now.
I love that, and I think it's such a nice tattoo to have and such a sentimental one as well. I really love that. Now, my next question for you is a question that I ask pretty much all of my guests, and it's one of my favorite questions to ask. Now, I feel like I might already know the answer to this, but what would you say has been your proudest moment so far?
In sport or in life in general?
Whatever you want it to be.
Um, I'd probably say that decision to go traveling. That was the most important decision that I ever had to make, and ultimately it changed my life for the better. I mean, it could have gone so many different ways, but I attacked it with a really good, positive mindset, and I'm really glad that what it gave to my life. It gave me 4 years of traveling and opening my mind to see the world, see different cultures, see different people, different ways of living, different ways of adapting. You know, I was living, like I say, from a backpack, and my environment was changing all the time, whilst my vision was changing all the time. So it made me almost like a master of adaptation, which with my condition you need. So yeah, that was a really good decision, a good choice. But second of all, it's probably getting married to Martina, my wife.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they are both such lovely proudest moments to have, and I think both brilliant proudest moments to have, and I can absolutely see why you would be so proud of both of them.
Mm.
But let's sort of look forward to the future then. Do you have any goals or aspirations for the future that you'd like to achieve?
Yeah, I would like to get to LA Paralympic Games. I would like to defend my Paralympic title once more. But potentially that might be my last games. I'm not sure yet. But when I hang out my javelin boots, I want to sit back and have a really kind of like wholesome feeling that I did something not just for myself, but also for the classification that I represent in the Paralympics, and to firmly concrete that classification there, by ways of educating the public and more about the perception the public have around visually impaired people, and make it more visible. And in doing that on a bigger screen would be incredible. So yeah, that's where I see it going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're already educating people anyway with your incredible achievements that you're doing. But I also think, your ambitions to do it on the big screen and on a bigger scale, I think they are really incredible ambitions to have. And I'm very, very excited to see what you do in the future with that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a real privilege to get to talk to you. I mean, you've achieved so many incredible things, and even not just in your career, but also outside of as well. And one of the things I really admire about you is how positive you are and how much of a positive thinker you are, because I think that's a really great quality to have. But thank you so much for taking a bit of time out of your day to talk to me.
Oh, it's been great, Evie. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you had a great time. So did I. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.